Hi, welcome to Resin Chem Tech. Today I'm going to show you a very simple way to move a switched outlet from here to over there. And we're going to do that with nothing more than a smart relay and a smart switch and no major rewiring anywhere else in your house. So stay tuned. Do you have a situation maybe in a bedroom where you have a wall switch that controls an outlet, but just due to furniture arrangement, that outlet is in the wrong place in the room? Well, previously you only had a couple of options. One, you could run an extension cord from the switched outlet to wherever you wanted it in the bedroom, or you could go up into the attic or crawl into the crawl space and actually rewire that circuit. Today I'm going to show you how you can take two smart devices and move that switched outlet to any place in the room or even another room. And the only wiring we're going to have to do is some very basic wiring at the switch itself. So before I begin, let me say that there are a lot of different ways to accomplish the same end result. There are multiple different devices that you can use, multiple different ways to automate this. The ones I'm going to talk about today, I'll explain why I selected these, and I'll talk about some of those alternatives as I go along. Next, check the video description and there'll be links provided there, including a related blog article that will have all the parts that I used and additional information regarding this project. So again, for this project, I've selected the Shelly 1 PM and I've selected a Sonoff S31 Lite. I've selected these two devices because we are going to need to be able to put local firmware onto these devices, and these devices make it very easy to do with no soldering involved. Now, why do we need local firmware? Why can't we use the cloud application that comes with this? Well, privacy and reliability and internet outages and all that aside, we need local firmware in this case due strictly to speed. We don't want a long delay between the time when we flip the wall switch on and before our lamp or other device comes on that's plugged into the outlet. To give you an example of the difference in speed between local and cloud, take a quick look at this. So what I'm going to show you here are a couple of different devices. The first is my Tailwind garage door. It has both local control through Home Assistant and cloud. And you can see the local response time when opening the door is less than 0.4 of a second. However, the cloud takes nearly 5.5 seconds before it provides a notification. I'll flip that around here and we'll try it with the door closing as well. And once that door closes, you'll notice again, very short time, less than a second on the local control. But again, the cloud is, in this case, is over 6 seconds. So now I'm also going to take a look at a Wise door versus a local Zigbee control. So again, when opening the door, the notification locally is less than 1/10 of a second. I really couldn't even measure it, where the cloud was nearly 3 seconds. When I close the door, again, the local notification is almost immediate, and the cloud takes almost 4 seconds. So you can definitely see that local is always going to be significantly faster than any kind of cloud service. So that shows why we need local control. While waiting 3 or 4 or 5 seconds for a notification that your garage door open might be fine, when we flip a wall switch on, we sure don't want to wait 3 or 4 seconds for the lamp to come on. Now, I picked these two devices because of the ease of putting custom firmware. In this case, we're going to be using something called Tasmota onto these devices. Now, you could substitute a smart switch for the relay or even a different type of smart outlet, assuming that you have a way to get custom firmware onto the device. A lot of times that's going to involve taking apart things that are glued together, identifying the pins, temporarily soldering wires. We're going to be able to put Tasmota on the two devices that I selected with none of that. And before anybody brings it up in the comments, yes, I know that Shelly now includes the option for local control through MQTT on most of their devices. So you wouldn't necessarily have to put Tasmota on here to get local control through something like Home Assistant. But we still need local control on this, and by putting Tasmota on both of these, we're going to be able to complete this project without using Home Assistant, without using an MQTT broker or any other type of hub. Now, since Tasmota also has MQTT support, we can integrate these into Home Assistant and do other types of automations, but it's not needed for this particular project. Now, don't panic when I talk about flashing custom firmware. It's very, very simple to do, especially on these devices, and I'm going to walk you through that step by step. So to put Tasmota on our devices, The one thing we're going to need is a USB to TTL adapter. Now there are a couple different variations on this. I happen to be using an FT232. You can also use a CH340G. But the one thing about the this FTDI version, look up here closely, there's a toggle switch on here that this will run 5 volts or 3.3 volts. Make sure this is on 3.3 volts. I'm probably going to say that a few times. If you have this set on 5 volts and you plug your device into it and plug it into USB, you're most likely going to damage or destroy your device. So it's very, very important to make sure this is on 3.3 volts. Next, we're going to need some DuPont jumper wires. I actually just created a cable that I leave attached to this. But again, what we need to connect to up here, we need to connect to the RX, TX, ground, and our VCC or our voltage. The only other thing is that to be able to flash these ESP devices, you have to pull GPIO 0 to ground. In this case, there's a button, but for the Shelly, we actually need a separate ground wire. So I've actually spliced 2 ground wires together to the single one coming off of this. So again, I've got my voltage, my RX, my TX, and I have 2 ground wires. So that's all we need to get started. The other thing you might consider is just a USB extension cable, because you're going to have to sometimes hold down a button and then boot up and plug this thing in. And sometimes just having this extension cable makes life a little bit easier. It's obviously optional and not required. So this diagram shows the pinouts for the Shelly 1. All we've got to do is remove this little plastic cover, and we actually have headers where we can plug our DuPont wires in. So again, we're just going to follow along with this diagram, and we're going to connect a ground wire to the first pin here, the one on top, at least in the orientation I've got it here. And again, we need to pull GPIO 0 to ground to put it into programming or bootloader mode. So we're going to plug that into the next header. And then we've got our voltage or our VCC into the center. Okay, next we've got RX and TX. Now these need to be reversed, and this is a common mistake. So we need RX on this to go to TX on our board. So again, in my case, green is TX. I need that to go to RX on the Shelly 1. So green goes in next. And then again, our TX off the Shelly 1 to our RX on our USB to TTL board. So now at this point, we are ready to plug this into our USB, and the first thing we're going to have to do is identify the COM port. So now we're ready to connect our TTL adapter to our USB port. I'm going to mention it once again. Verify you're on 3.3 volts. I like to go ahead and bring up control panel because it's going to create a new COM port, and we're going to need to know what that COM port is when we go to Flash Tasmota. So now I'll simply plug this in, and we should see, sure enough, COM port 15. So now we know the COM port. All we've got to do is go over to our Tasmota web installer. There are a bunch of different versions here. Unless you need to pick a particular version, and we don't in this case, we're just going to go with the standard Tasmota release. Click Connect, select our COM port 15, and choose Connect. And again, it's going to prompt us to install the release version of Tasmota in English, so we'll click that. And we do want to go ahead and erase our device, click Next, and install. You generally just want to leave the web page up and leave it alone during this particular stage. Okay, so it's wrapping up the install. And our installation is now complete. Okay, so now Tasmota is installed. We still need to put this onto our Wi-Fi network. So this is still in flashing mode. So the first thing we need to do is we need to remove it from our USB and then remove that ground pin from GPIO 0, which is that second ground wire in, so that this is no longer in flashing mode. Okay, so now we've got that removed. We can plug this back in, and it should boot up and start broadcasting an access point. Now you could go ahead and hook this up to your mains power. I like to go ahead and get everything done here on the bench first. And another thing is never hook up mains power and your USB adapter at the same time. You will probably not only destroy this, but could potentially damage your computer. We'll plug that back in. This thing should reboot, come online. And if we go in here and we look at our Wi-Fi networks, we should see there it is, a Tasmota pop up. And again, what you're going to have is a number of letters and numbers related to the MAC address here. We're simply going to tap that, let that join our Wi-Fi network. It's going to ask us to sign in. And again, your device may be different. One thing you want to do is make sure you go ahead and select yes, even though there's no internet connection. And then if it doesn't come up automatically, you're going to browse to 192.168.4.1 in your browser. And all we've got to do here is simply type in, select our address. I'm going to take this off screen while I enter my password in. Okay, what will happen when it successfully connects, it will shut down the local access point and again, join over to our Wi-Fi network. There we go. And it's actually going to go ahead and give us the new IP address, 192.168.1.194. So we need to note that. Now we're going to jump over to the web browser. So at this point, I've opened a web browser. I've just browsed the IP address that it gave me from the install, 192.168.1.194 in my case. And you'll notice this still says Sonoff Basic. By default, that's the way Tasmota is going to install. We need to configure it to use our Shelly 1PM. But it's a very easy process to follow. We're going to go to Configuration, Configure Other, and then what we need is we need to supply a template. Well, it's very easy to copy and paste this template by going to the Tasmota device repository. And again, I'll leave links to all these sites in the video description, and you can also find them in my related blog article. But we're going to pull up our Shelly 1PM, and all we're going to do is we're going to take this template down here. We're going to copy that. We're going to go back over, and we're simply going to paste that into this field. One thing you need to make sure that you do, though, is check this activate box. I am going to go ahead and enable MQTT. That's for the Home Assistant side. It's not going to be required here, so I'm not going to go into details on that. You can see information at the Tasmota website about how to configure MQTT, but I am going to go ahead and put a device name in here and the name of, this is what's going to be used in, so I'm going to call this family room switch, where this is going to be installed. And then I'm just going to simply go ahead and click save. The device is going to reboot. There we go. And now we can see we have a Shelly 1PM, and it's already having power ratings over here. Okay, so now we also need to flash Tasmota onto our S31 Lite. It's going to be really the same process. The only difference is going to be the connection of our adapter to this, because there's no pins available here, but actually it's a very simple process. No soldering is going to be involved. Nothing here is glued together. We're just going to very carefully go around and pop this end cap off. Okay, when we do that, there are two rails that simply slide off, and then there are three small screws that we have to remove. And a real quick shout out to both Sonoff and Shelly here for continuing to support the DIY market and allowing you to flash custom firmware to your device. Okay, once that's done, be careful. These screws are very small and very easy to lose. We simply lift this out, and here, get it up here a little bit higher so you can see it, are going to be our connections for our VCC, our RX, TX, and our ground. So we're going to use little hook clips for this so we can avoid soldering. I have soldered wires to these in the past, but these pads are very, very easy to burn off or tear off. So we're going to do this without soldering. Okay, so what I've done here is I've used these small little hook clip leads, and I've carefully connected each one to our VCC, our RX, our TX, and the ground here at the end. There are a couple of other pins here. You won't be using those. Again, diagrams will be available in my related blog. The other ends of those simply connect to our DuPont pins that feed into our USB port. Now you might be asking, wait a minute, what about GPIO 0? We said we have to have that held to ground to put this into flashing mode. Well, with this case, we actually have a push button. By holding that button down when we apply power, it's going to, again, put this into flashing mode. And just to make sure everything's hooked up right and we have communications, I have my control panel pulled up again. So it can be tricky at times. Takes a couple of hands here. I've seen people actually put a power cord on here, which actually might work better, but I'm going to hold this button down, continue to hold it down, push that together, and if successful, again, I saw my serial port, so now I can release the button. Okay, so now it's in flashing mode. Again, make sure you've got RX connected to TX and TX connected to RX, and make sure nothing here is touching. But we're now in flash mode, so all we need to do is flash Tasmota onto this in the exact same way that we did with the Shelly 1 PM. Now note what I'm showing here is the current method of installing Tasmota as of the recording of this video. Future versions may add features like the ability to onboard onto your Wi-Fi right from the web browser without having to go over and use your phone. So you can always check the Tasmota website for the latest release notes and options for installing. Okay, now that flashing is complete, we need to cycle the power on this to get it out of flashing modes. So in this case, we just have to unplug it and plug it back in again. There is no wire to remove because this time we're just not going to hold down that button for GPIO 0. And once again, as soon as that happens, you give it a second or two, and you should see the Tasmota access point pop up. There it is. And we're just going to follow the same process of onboarding it onto Wi-Fi and getting our IP address, and then going into the browser with the new IP address. Okay, Tasmota is installed. It's on our network, gone to the IP address. In this case, it's 0.204 for me. So now again, it says Sonoff Basic. We just need to configure this for the Sonoff S31 Lite. So we're going to go the same process, configuration, configuration other. And again, for our template, we're going to jump out to our repository, find our Sonoff S31 Lite. We're simply going to copy that template, come back in here, paste it, activate it, and again, I'm going to go ahead and put device names and friendly names in here. This is for later. Click the save on that. Give the device a couple of minutes to reboot. And again, now we see we got our Sonoff S31 Lite. We have the ability to toggle, but again, you really can't see anything at this point. But that's pretty much it. Again, for the configuration, we will come back again in a minute and join the Sonoff S31 to our Shelly 1 PM. Okay, so now that our flashing is complete, we can disconnect this, simply remove all of our jumpers from this, and all we've got to do is reassemble this in the exact same reverse order that we took it apart. I threw a graphic up earlier on the screen that talked about power monitoring with the Shelly 1. If you have the full Sonoff S31, it has power monitoring as well. If you want to use those features, you need to be sure to calibrate your power before use, and there's information on that on the Tasmota website. We're just not using it here. Okay, so that's reassembled, and now we have Tasmota both on our Shelly 1 PM and our Sonoff S31 Lite. Obviously, to power this, all we've got to do is plug it into an outlet, but we do need to wire this in to our switch next. Now I'm going to show you how to wire the Shelly relay into your switch, and I'll put my normal caveat out there. We are going to be dealing with household voltages at this point, so always assure the power is shut off at the breaker, and if you're uncomfortable with this step, consider hiring a friend with more experiences or a qualified electrician. But if you've ever installed or replaced a single pole light switch, this is no more difficult than that. I'm going to show what little bit of wiring there is here on the bench, just because it's a little easier to film. It'll be a little bit easier to see than if I was trying to do it, in the wall with a wall switch. But what I've got set up here is just a basic switched outlet. So when I flip the switch on, again, you can see there's power to the switch or to the outlet. Flip the switch off, power goes off. So it's exactly the way you would find it wired in your wall. First thing I'm going to do while the power is still on, I'm going to take my tester and test to make sure my tester is good. Always a good idea to do that. Make sure the battery in that's not dead. Okay, then I'm going to kill the power or simulate going out and tripping the breaker. I'm going to come back. First, I flip the switch on. Again, we see the lights don't come on, but we're going to verify that again with our tester. Make sure we have no live power anywhere in the box. So once we've confirmed that, we're simply going to remove the switch from the box. Okay, now we're just going to gently pull our switch up and out of the box so we can expose the terminals over here. And once again, you need to check inside your box, make sure you have a white neutral. If you do not have a neutral in the box, then this is not going to work. So before you go any farther and do anything else, make sure you've got that white neutral. All right, at this point, all we're going to do is simply disconnect the switch completely. Okay, now that we've got the switch removed, we're simply going to take these two wires and we're going to join them together with a wire nut. I know you can also use something like a Wago clip here. I absolutely love these, and to me it's a little bit more secure connection than a wire nut, but a wire nut will work. Okay, so at this point what we've done is we've really just bypassed our switch altogether. If I carefully turn the power back on, you see that this outlet is now live all the time. So at this point we've bypassed the switch, but don't worry, we're going to add it back next. Okay, so now we're going to wire in our relay. And I went ahead and just added short jumper wires here, but our N, which is going to be this white wire, is going to attach to our neutral in our box. L1 is going to go to our live or our line, and then L and SW are going to attach to the two terminals on this switch. Now, the O would normally be your out or out to your load, which would normally go out to your switch. But again, we're not going to be controlling anything with this. This is simply going to be talking to our Sonoff S31 to turn it off and on. So I'm going to wire these in and I will be right back. Okay, so you can see I've wired things in just as I described. That N is going to our neutral bundle, the L1 to our line or our hot, and then the L and the SW to our switch. Now, if we pull up Tasmota in here, okay, we can see that our switch is online. It currently says off. If I flip the switch, okay, you notice that it says it's on, but notice there was no change in our outlet because, again, we don't have anything connected. If I turn this off, again, it's going to show off. I can also toggle it in the software on and off, and I can hear the relay clicking as I do that. So everything is working. Our switch will toggle this off and on, but again, our outlet is all the way hot. So all we've got to do now is get the Shelly one talking to the Sonoff S31. Okay, so what I've done now is I went ahead and put my switch back together. The Shelly one was already wired. You just have to kind of cram everything back in the box and push it down in there. That can be one of the most challenging parts, but that's done. I've turned my power back on, and that means, if you remember, this outlet is always hot. So our Sonoff S31 is always going to have power. In fact, if we flip over here and take a look, okay, we see both our Shelly 1, which is our switch, is online, as is our Sonoff S31. Now I can flip the switch, and you'll notice that the Shelly goes on. You can even see the little light from the relay lit up in there. But our Sonoff S31 did not go on. And again, I can flip the switch back off, and it's going to turn off this. And I can even toggle this on. But again, it doesn't turn on the Shellys because these aren't linked yet. That's what we're going to fix next. Okay, to link these two devices together, it's very easy. We're going to do the exact same thing for both devices. We'll start with the Shelly one by going to console. Now don't let this scare you. Again, it's a couple of very easy commands. The first command we want to do is give it a dev group name. We want both of these to be the same, because that's what's going to tell these two devices that they're in a group and they should communicate back and forth. I'm just going to call mine fam room. And notice that this is case sensitive, so remember what you set on one. We'll go ahead and put that in there. We'll hit enter. And again, it tells us dev group name 1 is fam room. The only other thing we got to do is now we have to do a set option 85 space 1. Oops, space 1. And hit enter. What that does is it turns device groups on. Now we're going to go over here to the Sonoff S31 and do the same thing. Dev group name fam room. Enter that, and then set option 85 to 1 and enter on that. Okay, so now let's go back to the main menu on both of these and see what happens if we toggle the switch on. And there it goes, the Sonoff S31 also turned on. Let's go back to our actual, toggle these back off. And let's go ahead and turn these back on again so you can see them. And now let's see what happens if we just flip our switch on to what happens with the Sonoff S31. Boom, it comes on as well. If I flip my switch off, this goes off as well. Now, it may seem like there's a little bit of a delay, and that's really just the software. So let me go ahead and plug this in as well, so that way we can see when the power actually comes on to the S31. So I'm going to flip the switch, and you notice my lights here come on almost immediately. Flip it here, the lights go off immediately. Notice that I can also toggle on this, and notice the relay comes on as well. So I can turn the power off or on from either device, and it's going to cause the other one to stay in sync. So both these devices are now in sync, and whichever one turns on or one turns off, it's going to be reflected on the other. So once this setup's complete, I can now move control of this switch any place I want in the room by just plugging this in. If I want this switch to control this lamp, I plug this in to the outlet back there. And if I want that same wall switch across the room to control this lamp instead, all I do is take my Sonoff S31, move it from that outlet, and plug into the outlet back here. Or I can even move this to a completely different room. If I want that wall switch in there to control this outlet in here, once again, all I do is move my Sonoff S31, plug it in here, and now the wall switch will control whatever I plug into this, even in a different room. So this entire project to move a switched outlet took me less than an hour and cost about $35 for the Shelly 1PM and the Sonoff S31 Lite. That's a lot cheaper than hiring an electrician, or a lot quicker than taking time to either crawl up into your attic or crawl into your house into the crawl space to try to rewire a circuit to move a switched outlet from one location to another. And I've just covered the very basics of what's available with Tasmota. I would encourage you to check out the Tasmota website to look at other options, some best practices backing up your bin file, or if you want to enable MQTT, all that information is there. There'll be a link down in the video description. In addition, I really didn't talk about the integration into Home Assistant. Tasmota is now natively integrates into Home Assistant, so there's a lot you can do with automations in Home Assistant as well. But again, it's not required for this particular project. So that's going to do it for this video. If you found anything useful or anything you like, please hit that like button. That lets me and YouTube know you would like to see more videos like this. And if you want to see more of my videos, please hit that subscribe button and ding that little bell icon if you want to be notified when I release new videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.